And I don't know if they've made this after lunch for a reason, but hopefully keep your energy up for this presentation. But I'm glad you're here. This is a track that doesn't get a lot of attention. As you know, most of the vendors here are either in selling a software product or have some processes they want to implement. So we're going to talk about the people side of change and hopefully give you some tools that will help you in dealing with resistance that you run into. As mentioned, I work for General Motors, so we've got a lot of assets, so we're dealing with a lot of issues with understanding warranty and understanding where things go after we're done with it. I've got a lot of experience. I'm also the Change Management Institute's president for the Great Lakes chapter, which is an international body that is really trying to educate people in the areas of organizational change management, and then I have a lot of experience in a number of companies. Before we get going, I wanted to just get a raise of hands. How many of you are actually here as a representative of a software solution or a vendor of some sort selling? And most of you other people are here trying to implement some of these things or looking for the best in class that your companies could use? Okay, great. I'll keep my presentation kind of geared to you since you're the majority. I just wanted to take a little bit, because I know after lunch this is I just wanted you guys to see a boat that I'm building, and I wanted to get your help because I'm having a real struggle, really trying to figure out what to put on this thing. So I'm going to go to the coast of France there and maybe Monaco, and so I wanted to just yell out some ideas of what things you'd want on your yacht. Any ideas? Okay. Helicopter pad, that's what I wanted too. A slide? Speak up, sorry. I'll put some paint on it, okay. People said like bars, we want a bar on there. We want to make sure we've got some staterooms and a disco, some people have told me, things like that. So all of the times I do this, and I ask people about, doing this, because this is a wonderful dream of mine and probably maybe some of yours, but what we never hear when I ask that question is, I need a navigation system or a depth finder or ship-to-shore kind of communications things. And you know why? Because I kind of set you up, and it's a psychological thing, because of the images I show you here are really all about the optimistic, it's always going to be bright and sunny. And this is how we go into business. We go in with solutions and projects and things start up. We really are optimistic. We want to be positive, but we don't always plan for those things that we don't really want to think about, which is, maybe a big storm, and I need a life raft or something like that. But those things we do need as well. So what we want to talk about, I kind of have a navigation theme going here. I want to talk to you about resistance. When you guys start up projects or you're going to implement one of these solutions or you have maybe even some cultural change that you're underway, you're going to face employee resistance. And I want to kind of surface some of these early warning indicators. So if we were on our ship and we had this kind of technology, you guys can have this kind of leading indicators, awareness, and maybe be proactive in doing something about it. So we're going to talk about those resistors from the employee's perspective, also some organizational contributors. So when you walk into an organization, you're already facing some things that you need to be aware of. And then I want to hopefully give you some proactive actions that you can take back to your organization and hopefully implement. So again, as I stated, kind of using this nautical theme, the interesting thing about a sailboat is that you need resistance. You need to have that force of the wind in order to propel you, to give you that energy so that you can go. But it's you being able to harness that energy and navigate those forces in a way that you can go where you want to go. And it's also about the keel. The keel down in the water needs that to balance that boat. And organizations, believe it or not, need resistance just like that. They want stability. Organizations put things in place in order to operate so they can be predictive. So when change comes along, it needs to really be greater than the resistance that is in the organization already. And that's one of the key themes here today, because as many of you have an optimistic outlook of maybe buying one of these products or implementing this, is that 70% of all projects fail. This is not my statistic. This is statistics from Gartner Group, from E&Y. I can cite all ProSci, all kinds of different research corporations that can prove these. And those things that people don't really realize are all tied to dealing with the resistance and implementing things with a concern over the people and not just the technical solution. So we have like 33% not having good management sponsorship. We have 39% of employee resistance. We have other factors that are obstacles that maybe we didn't think about, the integration issues and things, but we get into the budgetary things. But I can tell you 70% of the projects that get started this next year will fail unless you deal with some of the things we're going to talk about right now, which is resistance. So why do we have these barriers in front of us? You're facing an organization that's had a strategy for a period of time. If this change is contrary to that strategy or taking the company in a new direction, it's a strategic barrier. So people have already bought into where you're going, why you're doing it, all of those reasons, and now you're coming in and saying maybe we want to change that. So you have strategy issues. We have structures. We have organizational structures. We have structures in the way our processes work. We have controls within our systems. All of these force people to do work a certain way. They're monitored, their performances and everything. So you're up against that. Unless you change some of those structures, it's just like the highways. We had a big highway project in Michigan, and they shut it down for a whole year. This one major artery into the city. Now, the thing is, they put up barriers so you couldn't use that. So that was a big change for people. They had roadblocks and things, and other people had to find different routes. That was a big change, but they did it the right way in dealing with the people and getting them to understand what the alternative routes are and things, so it was good. You also have operations. So many of you are here today looking at best practices of how to manage your assets, and there are ways that products move through logistics, all of these things. They're structurally put into place to get that stability, to keep the organization going in the direction of the forces that we identified when we put these things in place. So you got to change those operations. That's something else you're going to have. Then you got the culture. So if you've got, I love this statement, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So as you come in with a new strategy, you come in with a new project, and you've got all the benefits laid out for everybody, and the culture isn't ready for change, or the culture is really resistant, it's a tough battle. So we've got to deal with things like that. And of course, then, do you have the right competencies? Do you have the right people with the right skills at the right time to perform these jobs? So these are some of the rudimentary issues that you face when you try to make a change in an organization and with people. So there's an interesting new revelation kind of going on in the organizational change management area. And it's changing the conversation about change management normally being this nebulous thing, soft skills, you know, really people don't want to deal with if you're especially in manufacturing or plant floor facilities. But we do a really good job, especially in the software industry, of designing it, developing it, testing it, and delivering it. And that's the effectiveness category here. But then where we are weak, and why I'm speaking with you today, is hopefully to raise your level of awareness that how much of your success is dependent upon the people doing their job differently with that new either project system or new policy that you're implementing. It's that percent of how proficient they are in doing their job that ultimately will determine your success. And we often neglect that. And some of the strategies that I run into when I've gone to different companies are that we are going to tell you on Monday that your training is on Tuesday and we're launching on Wednesday. That's the strategy. That's the people management approach. And the level of engagement is very, very low. So I ask people to, when you're thinking about change, to think in terms of how much of the software or system solution will contribute to more efficiency. So that's really down here in the installation contribution. How much automation are you getting, or efficiencies, or so headcount reduction that you can get? People are very good at quantifying that. But ask yourself, for the people that are going to be doing this new job, have new responsibilities, new performance expectations, how much of your project success is reliant on that? And that's the percent of return on investment you need to make on the people side for adoption. So how fast do you need them to do their job? how many of them need to do it, and how effectively. So we talk about things, that proficiency statement is all about how quickly are they adopting, how quick is the utilization, and how proficient they are in being able to do the job, and that will get you your return on investment. So why do people, when that statistic is so high at 70%, is because they're not realizing the business benefits that were identified in either the charter or the business case. Because many months go by as people try to catch up and deal with the people problems, that return on investment and the promises that you make to your leadership team are not realized immediately. It's because you didn't do a proactive plan in organizational change management. That's what the research shows, and that's what my experience also has shown. So let's talk about why employees resist, okay? I put these icebergs up there, no reference to the Titanic or anything, but I thought it played well with the navigation theme. That we have, like, people are comfortable. These are icebergs that you guys are going to face when you try to implement change. People are comfortable, they are competent in the way they do things today, and they have a certain level of control. So if they're highly invested in the current state, and in some cases many of them were the grandfather or the father of the solution that's in place today, they don't want to change because they know this thing inside and out, and they really have built a career on that. So why would they want to change? So you got to look for those people in your organization like that, get them engaged with you in the new solution, get their level of adoption up quickly, and get them on board so they can be birthing the new solution, the new change, whatever it is. And then we have the fear of loss. People feel like I might be losing power. I might be losing control over my staff because now I'm not going to be the subject matter expert. If you can go out and identify these people in your organizations, if these are going to be the highly resistant people, get them on board, and I'll show you some things that you can do with them that will really help them be advocates and pull other parts of the organization, because many of those people are high influencers, even though they may not have the formal position in the organization. So I just wanted to ask, if you were to think of resistance in your organization, if you could just yell out, it's a little hard to hear, but just yell out, what would be some of the early indicators for you that you are facing resistance? Anyone? I try to make this interactive to keep the level of engagement up. I'm using my, yes, go ahead.
So you go live and you get resistant or
Low utilization, right? People are maybe using the old spreadsheets or the old ways of doing things. They're not adopting the new. Go ahead. Perfect. I love that one. We have all kinds of problems with scope problems because we don't have the right people in the room with the time we're doing blueprinting or designing and defining those requirements. And why aren't they in those rooms? Sometimes it's because they're not available, and that's a leadership problem of getting the right people at the right time in the right meeting. Other times it's because they don't want to be there. So we miss those requirements. We go right through that stage. We think we have everything, and by the time we launch, we have to de-scope because we just missed a huge requirement and people are going to refuse to do it. So let me give you a few others here. If you start to hear those gossip and rumors about why this will not work, okay, these are early signs. The key resources are missing those meetings or ignoring process steps in the utilization. The scope changes. Projects are delayed. So again, if you have projects right now that are having a hard time getting off the ground because you're not getting key participants in the meetings, it's a form of resistance. It might not be blatant, it might not be, an openly noticeable thing, but there's some resistance behind that. You'll see people leaving the organization, key knowledgeable people. Again, loss of valued employees, and then you have malicious compliance. So people will be in the meeting saying, yes, I agree with that, yes, I agree with that. They go back to their organizations and tell people, can you believe that? What they're going to do, it's never going to work. So these people are actually hurting you. So I wanted to share with you the emotional side. Now we're kind of getting into psychology, and I don't know how many of you are really exposed to this, but I've kind of combined the 5 stages of grief, because that's a kind of a thing that people go through when they feel a loss in their power of their position. And there's also William Bridges, author, believes that people really can't focus on what is new until they deal with what's ending. And then there's this neutral zone that they have in between where people start to really be innovative in adopting the new beginning. So I put these things together because the first time that an organization hears about a change or something, they believe they have a certain level of influence. They know they have a power position. They know the hierarchy, whether that be formal or informal. But they believe that they have a way of saying no. And in many cases, these changes and investments and that are way more powerful than them. And so when it becomes real, they're in that shock and disbelief. That there's anxiety, and there's that denial, and then there's that resistance. But what I wanted to also share with you is that when you start to hear people negotiating, well, what if we could maybe just keep this part from the old system, and maybe we can do that new thing? You know then that people are starting to get out of that resistance stage and start to come up, and they're starting to say, okay, I know this is going to happen, but can we just hang on to this? You know, they're grasping at the old. You know that they're getting on board, but you have to do this in advance of when your project launch is going to happen, because believe me, if people don't go through these, they're going to stay over here. And the thing I also point out is that people will come up here, learn something new, and slide back down. So everybody is on an individual journey, and you really need to know your organization. You need to know the key players in your organization and monitor where they are as leaders to be able to address this resistance. So I've given some really high-level things we talked about earlier. There's that lack of buy-in. There's that organizational culture. So if you don't know if you haven't done like a Myers-Briggs or a DISC assessment, these are things that HR does to help you really understand what characteristics are they risk takers, or are they very conservative? These are things that you have to build into the plan to overcome so that you can stay on schedule and ensure that you have that high rate of utilization when you go live, you have high level of adoption, and your people are ready, prepared, and are proficient at doing their job and meeting the performance expectations. The other thing that I want to mention here is, well, we talked about the structure of the organization. There's going to be moves, and a lot of times people go right for that first. Let's move people around in the boxes, make us happen. And that's good for the project team, but sometimes that's not the most important thing to deal with. It's not moving people around to enable the project to be successful. It's really understanding why the people are resisting. Then you can, once you get the processes in place and the technical solution launched, then you might look at ways to optimize the organizational structure to enable those people to do more in their positions. The other really large factor of why projects fail, and it was mentioned on my earlier graph, was lack of sponsorship. If you have people that come to the kickoff meeting, they're all for it, and you don't see them and they disappear, that's not active and visible sponsorship. That's not commitment. That's not people dealing with freeing up the key resources, like you said. If you're missing requirements, it's because they haven't freed up the right people. We have this saying at General Motors that, you know, the Detroit Lions used to always pick the best player available in the draft, you know, the one with the most talent. Not necessarily the one they needed in the position, but the best player available. A lot of times, that's just who has the most time, and like they can participate because they're not busy. Well, that doesn't mean they're the best person for the job. And a lot of times, that sponsor needs to make that happen. They need to backfill that right person to be in those meetings to get those requirements. And that's one of the really root cause areas of why projects fail, is lack of good sponsorship and lack of sponsorship engagement. And then we have, you know, the history of failed change, limited resources, change fatigue. If your organization's under huge pressure and lots of change going on, there is only so much they can handle. There's a saturation point. They can only take on so much. And so we also like to say you can't say yes until you say no first. That's what because we have overburdened our people. They don't have the capacity to take on more. So we ask our leadership, before you add something new, what are you going to say no to? I also want to we're going to get into this part now about proactive things. So let's talk about project management. Most organizations really do a good job in understanding what it takes to have a good project leader. They have PMI, Project Management Institute, that's, you know, certifications in that. It's all about the installation of what that new process is, or it's the installation of that software solution. It's the schedule, it's the tasks, it's the budget, it's getting the resource constraints out of the way. Those are good projects, and you must have that. But again, why I'm here today is to raise your level of awareness about organizational change management, and that's about the implementation. It's about preparing the people. If you go back to that graphic where what is the return on investment, how much of the success of your project is reliant on people being able to do their job differently, that's how much you should invest in change management. A proactive approach to getting people prepared and ready, and a sustaining that change that you're implementing. Because a lot of times over time, they will break down those things you put in place with the new and revert back to the old. So organizational change management works in parallel with the project management team to make sure all the active steps are in the plan to make sure that your people are ready and prepared. So again, going back to our boat, if we only worried about the project schedule and we worried about meeting the timing and what the budget is, and we really didn't take into account what the customer wanted, what's going to happen when that boat is delivered? And that's a lot of times what happens in the organization. We make promises to our executive teams, we make promises to our people about how much better everything is going to be, but we don't do a really good job in preparing them, and so there's disappointment by the time that project is delivered. Just go through this really quickly. This is a graphic that I'd like to show. It's the level of productivity and the over time. And what I would like, the traditional approach when people don't use change management strategy is the dotted line, and then we have this solid line that's really the change. If you use the approach I'm going to share with you in a few minutes here, is that it'll take longer for you to stay in that engagement level. See, if you use some of the strategies that I'm going to talk about, your productivity is going to go down. Why? Because now you're signing people to different projects they weren't on before. So the productivity of those other things are going to go down. It's an impact. No getting around it unless you hire a bunch of new staff people. But you still have the subject matter experts that are going to have to tell you about current state. So they're going to be on this project. They got to be taken off something else. So you are going to have that dip in productivity, but you're going to have a shorter time getting them involved. And you're getting this employee readiness. How long you stay at that low productivity level is all due to the things you do in that, remember that curve I showed you earlier about that emotional curve? If you can get the people on board, have active sponsorship, you will only stay in that lower productivity state at a much shorter time than the traditional approach. And then again, the KPIs are not being met. These are these early warning indicators. Requirements are missed. People start blaming others. That's when you're at that low point, and you've got to get out of it quickly, and we've got some tools here that can help you. But it all gets down to you want to implement that new change, and you want it to be sustained over time. So you've got to go and put the structures in place that you tore down. When I went back to a strategy, I went back to the organizational structure, I talked about the culture, and I talked about the competencies. These are the things that you've got to reestablish in this plan to make sure the change will be sustainable. So how can OCM, Organizational Change Management, help you? So most people, when you follow that dotted curve, will say that change management is about communication and training, and it certainly is a big component, but it's not everything. You've got to make sure that people understand the messaging. But most project teams, it's a one-way communication, a tell. We're on schedule, we're on task, this is where we're at, here's when it's going to impact you, and that's, here's when training is. But 70% of all projects are failing even though they do these things, and they might be doing them better than they did them before. So what's different? This organizational change management that I'm talking about is really going out and doing these assessments to find out about your culture. Where are those resistors? Where are those areas where, and I'd like to use the military, because a lot of strategy comes from the military, and it's about knowing where the friendlies are, knowing where the low areas are that the boat's going to run aground, really mapping those out, having a plan to mitigate that, have actions in place. But the first part is that discovery. going out there and taking the time to understand what you're walking into. Any military leader that would send troops into a battlefield without knowing this kind of stuff is really taking high risk. So why do project managers do it? Why not find out where is our organization on this change? What are the issues that they're having? Let's get them surfaced early. Let's react to them. Let's get them built into the project plan. If we can mitigate it, if we can address it, we can incorporate it, we're going to see ourselves get to that early stage of adoption much quicker. So assess and strategize the transformation. Here's some of the tools we use. Now, you can maybe hire an organizational change management professional like myself, or you can get tools like this from companies like I'll mention ProSci. But there's things that you go out and you do. You get a stakeholder analysis, a stakeholder assessment, and analyze where your stakeholders are in this change. Because I can tell you they all agree in principle, but when it comes time to pay the price or what the impact is to their organization, all of a sudden it becomes an issue. And it's an issue maybe at some point in time down the road in your project plan that's going to add a delay that you didn't anticipate, because when you talked to them at the kickoff and you got their buy-in, they were all on board. But when you start to explain to them what the real change is and how it's going to impact, how many resources they're going to have to allocate to this project, oh, I didn't know I was signing up for that. So do this up front. Get this alignment up front, because we're so integrated now cross-functionally that we need everyone's buy-in to understand what it is we're changing. Which leads to the next set of tools. What are you changing? Many times, no one ever takes the time in a project. The project team is in the rooms doing the design. And they're talking about what the new future state is going to be. What is the new process? What's the system going to do? They never take that moment and say, how big of an impact that is to the different roles in the organization today. If they just did that right at that moment, if they asked that question and documented that answer that said, what are people going to have to stop doing that they do today? Tell them, you will not do this any longer. What are they going to have to start doing? What will be new? And what are the things you want them to continue? If you documented that, let me tell you what happens. You then put together a communication campaign. You then start building your training curriculum, and you build that material in so people understand how they are going to be impacted, because everybody wants to know what's in it for them. How is my job going to be impacted? We don't ever collect that information, and it's right at the point of time we're redesigning the new processes or the new system that we could answer that question. Because if you get a trainer, this is the first time people hear the objections, the trainer's on, that person's only there to deliver and explain to them how the screens work. They can't answer why. Why did you decide to do it that way? We could have a whole campaign, T-minus 9 months, to say to people, hey, this is coming and this is why we're doing it. When people know the why, they can start to understand and buy in. They can question it and challenge it and get answers way in advance before they show up for training. Because then what happens? I got 3 hours for training to get these people ready, and they're sitting there with their heels dug in and their arms crossed, and we could have avoided all that. Before you go live, a readiness assessment. And if you do use some of these tools that I'm talking about today, if you were doing a communication campaign T-minus 4 months before the go live, and you could say, how effective are my communications? How effective are my campaigns of getting people on board? How close are my stakeholders staying to this project? Are they ready for me when I'm coming to them saying, okay guys, I need your resources now? If you could do these assessments, take a health check of where you are and let the project team have this information, they can do a lot with it well before go live. And of course, do a go, no go before a go live, because the last thing you want is to turn that switch. Executives are waiting for the results, and guess what? That utilization that we mentioned earlier, or the proficiency, people don't know how to use the system the right way, and you're not getting orders in, or warehouses are backing up. That's not when you want to be explaining you didn't do a good job in change management. So that's really the crux of my presentation. I wanted to open up for some questions. I do have some other materials, but I'd like to get some feedback from you guys about how much of this stuff is really new, how much of this stuff you question, really anything across the board of the material I shared with you now. Yes? Do we have a microphone? Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think from my side, so nothing very new, but I was going to ask you some questions when you deal with these changes through very large organizations. So you talked about involving the end users early in the process. So we deal a lot with shop floor employees who are operating machinery and so on, and we have a very large workforce. So the question is, how do you address this? I mean, how do you select the guys? You can only make so much travel, so you're not going to have a huge conference and bring 6,000 people in the room. Mm-hmm. How do you select the guys?
So we use a thing called a change agent network, where we get people who are highly influential in each of the organizations, and the more that, like, you try to get maybe one change agent for every 30 to 50 end users, and you try to cover the shifts, you try to cover each facility, you try to cover each organization. Those people will attend typically a 2-hour-a-month session where the project team is providing information about what are those impacts to the different roles, how well the project is progressing on schedule, what are some of the benefits, again, that they're going to see, and they then take that communication back to their home organizations and they socialize it. And then the next time they get back together, before they start on the next round of what's going to come next, they ask, how's it going? What questions are you hearing? What resistance do you see? And then the project team can either add some of these mitigation strategies to their project plan. They might call in organizational change management to go do an intervention at that site to find out why there's such a resistance, like what have we missed. But typically it's establishing people in that organization that can be your advocate, be your two-way communication channel, not just one-way, two-way. Make sure you collect that feedback. That's the way we handle large, decentralized organizations that are global. And we do it with a lot of video technology and calls and things, but we also do road shows. So we do keep costs down by going to those sites and delivering this information directly and trying to use the local leadership to deliver those messages. But good, thank you. Hi.
Hi. I work for a utility, and one of the challenges we have around change is trying to institute change management with our unions. And I know that's something you probably have had a lot of experience with, so any tips that you have in that arena would be really helpful.
Yeah, the most difficult union is in Germany with the Workers' Council, or Brazil, because they're government run, and they have a large say whether or not a change will happen. They have a strong voice. Again, it's not treating them as a last thing, a hurdle that we want to bring them in early. I mean, have them at your kickoff. I mean, there's nothing better than them seeing that you're being very transparent and inclusive. We've faced many difficulties with unions because anything that has to do with job responsibility changes, performance, changes that how we're monitoring performance, all those things that come along with the change. If you can share that information as far out as you can and work with them and find out what their objections are, then you can change some of the things in your process design or in your systems design to accommodate it. But if most people wait and they try to deal with it at the end, and then again, the projects are delayed and we're face all of those uncomfortable meetings with the executives, why did this happen now, not earlier? But the unions, I've seen, like I've worked at a client, Omaha Public Schools, that had 16 different unions represented. And it was a large body of people, and sometimes we didn't want them there together, so that's another concern. You need to, again, assess that stakeholder group, find out what their history is, find out what objections they've had in the past, because a lot of times it might be the same things. But make them a stakeholder group, engage them early, treat them just like you would any other large body of stakeholders that you have in the organization. That's what we do.
You talked about the change agent network. So they go out into the workplace and they help motivate and encourage the frontline supervisors, and sort of how much investment we can encourage, motivate, and actually get the frontline supervisors converted. Now, the frontline supervisors, if all they've done is been converted and not trained in converting, how do they deal with the people on the shop floor? And how much investment should they make on the last people who will not move? It doesn't matter how successful we are, we're going to have one or two that just don't want to move. How much investment should they make, and how do we educate the frontline supervisors so they're able to do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, two really good points. So the first one on getting those, the first thing we do is we have a set of characteristics of what makes a good change agent. Again, we look at where they sit in the organization, not just formally in the org structure, but informally. And again, we do that through, focus groups and things, try to find out who are the early adopters typically, and then we try to educate them by having courses on what it takes to be a good change agent. We send out a solicitation letter from the executive sponsor saying, you've been identified, we'd like to invite you to be a change agent. They still have the opportunity to object if they don't want to do it. But we really treat that role as part of the core project team and make them feel like they are included, and not just we're using them for a brief period of time, that they really recognize for certain characteristics that they have maybe beyond what their current role is. So that's helpful. The second question, let me see, I was so focused on that, the adoption curve. Yeah, you're going to have that distribution curve where you've all seen that bell curve where you're going to have 10% of the people are going to be really early adopters, and 80% of the people, and right down the middle of that 80%, 40-40, people will ride that fence for as long as they can, and then depending on what the early adopters influence, your change agents, your sponsorships role, and you explaining to them what it's in it for them and what are the impact to them, they shift over to that buy-in and adoption, but then you do have that 10% that will never buy in. And that's when you need to bring in your HR, and you need to really look at what options are available for them. I had two executives from Brazil both vying for the same position at a global role. We knew that one of them got it, the other one was probably going to leave the company. So, and we didn't want that to happen. So knowing that in advance, knowing those 10% of the people that are probably never going to really buy in depending on what the change is going to be, try to find something else for them to do to keep their level of comfort, keep their level of control. Again, you can do all these very creatively if you're proactive about it. If you know who those 10% are, and you can do assessments along the way to follow where people are on the adoption curve. But you also know people just based on their personalities. You can come up with a plan for them. You can find something, especially if they're talented people. If they're not talented and the organization's outgrown them, then it's time for HR, performance improvement plans, look at packages, things like that. You will not get everybody to adopt. That is a true statement. But you can do things about it, hopefully to salvage some of the really, really key employees.
All right, we got time for one more question.
One question about reluctance and difficulties in adoption. Are incentives ever a good solution?
Yeah, they are. They are very much so. When I was with Ford Motor Company and we were divesting a large part of our business to Visteon, we knew that in order for the transition to the new company to happen, we had knowledge transfer that had to occur. We knew we were going to let a large number of the staff go, but what we did was we put together performance incentive plans that said if you can transition and the person that you're transitioning to in the new company can sign off that they understand these things, you would get a bonus. So there are reasons for incentives. You got to do what's best for the project, do what's best for the company. It has to, make financial sense. but what is the risk you're trying to mitigate? And you can maybe build that business case to justify those incentives. But we do it all the time. I mean, there's no reason not to. I mean, I know it's sometimes feels wrong that you're incentivizing people just to do what's expected of them, but you know, we give bonuses out every year, so when the company's doing well. So why not give people, especially if they're going to do 2 jobs at once, and a lot of times that happens when we launch new systems, right? They're still working in the old, they got to do their job, and then they're doing the new. I just wanted to add one more thing. I know I'm out of time, but the other thing about your question on the leaders on the shop floor, get them in at your systems integration testing and user acceptance testing, and let them see the results before everybody else. If they like it or they don't like it, they'll tell you. But get them involved like that. That's another way to get them engaged. And I'm sorry, I forgot that. But thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you coming to this session. I will be available in the
Speaker's Corner.
Speaker's Corner. So thank you.
Let's give it up
thank
for
you
Scott.
again.
Very good.